What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you solo today to talk about my running back starts and sits for the week. Basically, what I'm going to be doing today is going through every matchup, every fantasy relevant running back, telling you whether you should start them, whether you should sit them, whether you should put them in your flex spot, whether you should drop them, whether you should stash them for a later point in time. Basically, an entire breakdown of every backfield in the NFL. So we're going to waste no time before we get into this. The obvious names you guys know, obviously, I'm going to skip over some of those, but we'll get deep and sort through some of these murky backfields together. I'll also be making reference to my rankings a lot. So if you want to get access to the rankings, you can go to the website, thefantasystockexchange.com. One of two ways you can get the rankings is by depositing on underdogfantasy.com. Using promo code FSE, you'll get 10 extra dollars to play with on the site. You'll get our weekly rankings for free. And if you want access to the rankings and you don't want to sign up for an Underdog account, you can get them for $20 on the website directly. So without further ado, guys, we're going to hit the intro and then we're going to get right into this. Okay, so Thursday night football, Giants at the Washington football team. We got some interesting backfields here. Obviously, you are going to be starting both of these running backs, Antonio Gibson and Saquon Barkley. I'll start with the Saquon side of things because it is a little bit more murky, but as I talked about yesterday, with Saquon Barkley, I'm not as concerned as some people might be because he played every snap in the third quarter coming out of halftime after a light first half where he was kind of eased in. And that was kind of limited again once the game was out of reach and he was taken out in the fourth quarter. So I'm not too concerned about Barkley. It is a tough matchup against the Washington football team. So if you don't want to buy low on him necessarily, maybe you could wait a week and he might have another bad game in this one and then you could buy low. But either way, he's still a guy that I'm going to be starting. He's currently my RB17 on the week behind guys like Miles Sanders, Chris Carson, Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift. He's like right in that range of running backs. For me, I would start him over guys like Darrell Henderson. I would start him over Myles Gaskin, some of those guys. So if you're wondering where Barkley kind of sits, if you have Myles Gaskin versus Saquon, go ahead and start. Saquon Barkley's usage, you guys can see it on the screen. As I mentioned, in the third quarter, he was used a lot, but overall, when we look at the utilization report, courtesy of Dwayne McFarland of PFF, and I'm going to be making reference to a lot of these throughout these videos because I think they're really, really good resources for you guys to use. If you have a PFF membership, I encourage you to go check those out. But we could see he only played 48% of the snaps, only 63% of the rushing attempts, but he did run a lot of routes, did get the most targets in the backfield, did get a lot of targets when he was running a route as well. So Barkley, again, this is a guy that we knew was going to be eased in. Don't panic. Don't sell him. Don't get rid of him for nothing, pennies on the dollar, 75 cents on the dollar. What you need to do is be patient with Barkley and just hope that the rest of your lineup can pick up the slack those first 2 to 3 weeks that you're dealing with Saquon's kind of inconsistent workload. With Antonio Gibson, it's a lot more cut and dry, as you can see on the screen as well. Antonio Gibson snap share 65%, 80% of the rushing attempts, 50% route participation, 26% of the targets. J.D. McKissic didn't get a single target in this game. It is wheels up for Antonio Gibson. J.D. will still be involved for sure, but 80% of the carries and all of the targets going to Antonio Gibson is basically proving that nobody should have been scared of J.D. McKissic this entire offseason in the first place. I think what we've seen from Antonio Gibson is exactly what we were hoping for. It's exactly what me and Danny were so high on in the offseason. The Washington football team ran 55 plays in this game, and Gibson had 25 opportunities, 20 carries, 5 targets. Every week, RB1 going forward. This is not a guy that leaves your lineup. So far, looking like a big hit for me and Danny, as we were very high on this guy coming into the offseason. So off of the Thursday night football game, now let's get into the 1 p.m. games. We have the Raiders at the Steelers. You're going to be starting Najee Harris, and I would say flexing Josh Jacobs because Najee Harris played 100% of the snaps. He didn't get a whole lot of volume in the Bills game, but he played 100% of the snaps. He was out there running routes. He was in there on every single running back play. It should be an easier matchup this week. So I would say giddy up. He's in the top 7 running backs for me against a Raiders defense that is not nearly as good as the Bills one that they played last week. On the Josh Jacobs side of things, on the Raiders side, Jacobs has a brutal matchup versus the Steelers run defense, right? And he will have to get into the end zone, in my opinion, in order to pay off for fantasy purposes this week. I was definitely concerned when I saw how much they were using a guy like Kenyon Drake. And I would say Kenyon Drake himself is not somebody that I want to be flexing necessarily, but if you're in a terrible position, a pinch, whatever the case is, maybe you could throw him into your flex spot. I think more so he's a guy that's just going to be a thorn in Josh Jacobs' side. You can flex Josh Jacobs for sure, but Henderson, Chase Edmonds, Gaskin, Kareem Hunt, Damian Harris, Tyson Williams, Elijah Mitchell are all guys I'd be willing to start over Josh Jacobs. So that's kind of where I'm at with him. When we look at the 49ers Eagles game, we have a start of Miles Sanders, flex Elijah Mitchell. I would sit Trey Sermon and I would sit Kenny Gainwell. Honestly, Miles Sanders looked fantastic in this first game. Not a bell cow necessarily, but 15 carries and 5 targets. That will absolutely get the job done as a low-end RB1, high-end RB2 type if Miles Sanders can stay efficient, which he was in that first game. So as you guys can see, the usage on the screen there, Miles Sanders running 66% of the snaps, getting most of the rushing attempts, 49% route participation, 13% target share. Again, overall, just a great kind of usage game out of Miles Sanders. I was more concerned that we were going to see more of Kenny Gainwell, more of Boston Scott, more of some of these tertiary backs in the backfield. But it looks like Miles Sanders is getting like the Marlon Mack type of role in Nick Sirianni's offense. So that is definitely great to see. He was a guy that I was a little higher on than consensus coming into the season, but he may even exceed my expectations. I believe he was my RB18 coming into the year. I had him right behind a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So Elijah Mitchell, we got to talk about him. He was the big ticket waiver wire ad. Is he a trap or is he a league winner? I'm leaning towards the side that he's going to be a trap. And it's not because I don't think Elijah Mitchell's a talented player. He was my RB7 coming into the draft class. I had him ranked higher than Trey Sermon from a talent perspective, but he's a 6th round pick. The usage, as you guys can see on the screen from week 1, is definitely encouraging to see. 64% snap share, 70% of the rushing attempts, 36% route participation. And it was actually even higher once you discount when Raheem Mostert left the game. He went for 100% of the fab in all of my leagues. Every single one of the redraft leagues that I'm in, Elijah Mitchell went for everybody's fab, basically. Everybody bid on the guy. He went for 100% of the fab. And my guess is that he's useful, of course, like for the rest of the season, but I think he's going to disappoint relative to those lofty expectations, where I've seen some people compare him to this year's James Robinson. I don't think that's the case because Kyle Shanahan is not Doug Marrone. Kyle Shanahan does not give anybody a bell cow running back role. He uses running backs interchangeably week over week, game over game, month over month. Injuries always happen. Kyle Shanahan knows that about running backs, which is why he always has a lot at his disposal. So I have him currently, Elijah Mitchell, this week as my RB26, just ahead of Melvin Gordon, just ahead of Josh Jacobs, Mike Davis, Chase Edmonds, Devin Singletary, and Leonard Fournette. So he's a guy that I'm willing to start this week. But if you guys got him, maybe you only got him for like $35 of fab or whatever. If he has a good game this week, I'd be probably looking to sell him just because I don't think this is going to be a guy that is this year's James Robinson necessarily. And if anybody in your league thinks that, then I think he's a good sell candidate. So fire him up into your lineup, fire him up into your flex spot. But a guy that I'm not just convinced I have an RB2 for the rest of the year if I picked him up on waivers. So the Texans at the Browns, I think it's pretty simple from the Browns perspective. You start both of the Browns running backs, and I would sit every Texans running back. The Browns are easy, right? We know the split. We know that Nick Chubb is the primary feature back on the ground. 56% of the rush attempts in week 1, 27% route participation, gets a lot of the inside the 5 carries and things of that nature. So we know what Nick Chubb is. We know what Kareem Hunt is, obviously, as well. Going to be about a 45 snap share type of guy. Going to get most of the receiving work, most of the routes, most of the targets. So Kareem Hunt, again, also going to be very efficient. So both of these guys in a great matchup are guys that you can start. Both are in my top 24 running backs. I believe Nick Chubb is like my RB6 on the week as well. So giddy up for those guys. But the Texans backfield is a lot more murky. I know Mark Ingram had 26 carries last week, but they had the perfect game script to basically run the clock out, pound the rock, and use Mark Ingram in the role that they, I guess, have it designed for him. I seriously doubt that Mark Ingram is going to get many game scripts like that for the rest of the season. I doubt this one in particular is a close game against the Cleveland Browns. I don't think the Texans are going to be leading the whole game like they were against the Jaguars. I don't even think this one's going to be very close. So I doubt that Mark Ingram is going to have this significant carry workload all season because I simply don't think the Texans are going to be in many games. Yes, they beat the Jaguars, but we could be talking about the number 1 and number 2 overall pick here. Like both of those teams are really bad. So I'm not putting too much stock into the fact that the Texans looked pretty good in that game because the Jaguars are a dumpster fire. So to me, this screams David Johnson game. If we're going to be picking a running back to flex in this backfield, I think it'll be David Johnson because I think he's the passing down guy. We saw it in week 1. And I expect them to be down in this game to the Cleveland Browns. So if Mark Ingram's on your waiver wire, I think he's a solid pickup, a solid speculative ad, but he's not a guy that I want to be starting necessarily or even putting in my flex spot. He's currently my RB37. You should have better options than a guy like Mark Ingram. If you have either the Broncos running backs, I would start them. If you have Mike Davis, Chase Edmonds, blah, 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 blah. All those guys I would start over a guy like Mark Ingram. I know we got a lot of carries but he is not a guy that I'm going to trust this week in a bad matchup against the Browns and in a negative game script at that. So the Broncos at the Jaguars, I kind of just made reference to both of these teams, but I think you can flex any one of the main three running backs in this game: Javonte Williams, Melvin Gordon, or James Robinson. In this game, if I had to say which running back from this game would I start, I have James Robinson the highest at RB25. I have Javonte Williams at RB26, and I have Melvin Gordon at RB28. So all of these guys are guys that I'm willing to throw into my flex spot. They're high-end RB3 types, but none of these guys are guys that I really want to be starting this week, even in a good matchup for these Broncos running backs. I'm big concerned with James Robinson. As I discussed yesterday on the trade targets video, the early down work was his bread and butter last year. It was the reason he was an RB1 last year. And it's great that he's still getting pass catching work, because we know if Travis Etienne had stayed healthy, then he would have ceded that away to Travis Etienne. But the one thing that I'm a little bit concerned with James Robinson is what happens when Duke Johnson is in the fold, because he just got signed recently. And when he gets into the fold, is this going to be a three-way timeshare similar to what it would have been if Travis Etienne was healthy? And that is my big concern with James Robinson. This is not the same guy that we're talking about last year. To me, I think this is going to be a three-way committee once James Robinson cedes some of that passing work to Duke Johnson, once he gets fully acclimated to the offense. I'll roll him out there, right, James Robinson, this week as a back-end RB2, high-end RB3, but I am very disheartened seeing what I saw from him in week one. Seeing Carlos Hyde out-carry him in this game was really, really concerning. As you guys can see on the screen, 53% of the rushing attempts Carlos Hyde got. Yes, James Robinson ran the most routes. He had the most snaps, but Carlos Hyde was getting targeted pretty often when he was running routes. The short down and distance was split 50-50. Again, James Robinson is the guy that is the most valuable in this backfield, but he's not as valuable as he was last year. And then for the Broncos side of things, you guys can see the split on the screen of what Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams did in week one. And you can see it was almost dead even, right? 50-50 on the snap share, 56% of the rush attempts for Javonte Williams, a little bit more of the receiving work for Melvin Gordon. And the one thing that I take away from this is that in Javonte's first game, I'm very impressed, because rookie running backs typically get out to slow starts. The fact that he was already on par with Melvin Gordon as far as a workload standpoint is definitely encouraging to see. I think this is a trend that we'll see continue as the season goes along. This matchup is juicy against the Jacksonville Jaguars, so both guys are in flex-worthy consideration for me. And Javonte Williams, I think, is a prime buy low candidate as well, because anybody who drafted Javonte Williams might be thinking, oh no, it's like a 50-50 split. They're not going to be, using Javonte Williams as a bell cow, because that was always in the back of people's minds who drafted Javonte Williams. So if you can go flip a Myles Gaskin, flip a, one of the, James Robinson, one of these back end RB2, low end RB3 types, Mike Davis or something like that. If you can flip those guys for Javonte Williams and you can get by until then at your running back slot, because those guys that I just mentioned are probably going to outproduce Javonte Williams for the next 2-3 weeks or so. But once Javonte takes over the starting job, he's going to be much more valuable than those guys ever would have been. So that's kind of my take on Javonte. Both Broncos running backs are in flex consideration for me, but neither guy is a must start by any means. So the next game that we have here is the Saints-Panthers, and it'll really take me 0.2 seconds to tell you which running backs to start in this game, because you obviously start Christian McCaffrey and you obviously start Alvin Kamara. The one thing I would like to say about Alvin Kamara, though, is that he did log a bigger share of the work than usual. What we've seen from Alvin Kamara over the course of his career is a guy that gets, 15, 12 carries a game, but he gets 10 targets a game. Well, Alvin Kamara had 20 carries in this game. With Latavius Murray now gone, with Tony Jones as the 2-back or the 1B in this offense, it looks like Alvin Kamara might get a bit more work than we're used to seeing from him. And that's great news for Alvin Kamara drafters who drafted him, second, third overall. If Alvin Kamara gets a little bit more work, this is a guy that can legitimately outproduce Christian McCaffrey from a fantasy perspective. He's probably one of the only running backs that I would say that about. So that is definitely good news for Alvin Kamara drafters. Tony Jones is worth a pickup as well, because he is clearly the handcuffed Alvin Kamara. So if you have Alvin Kamara, you want to handcuff him, or if you just want some upside on your bench, go and pick up Tony Jones as well, because it looks like he is clearly in that Latavius Murray role that we've seen in years past. To the Rams at the Colts, you are going to be starting Jonathan Taylor and starting Darrell Henderson, and you can also flex Nyheim Hines. On the Colts side of things, you guys can see the snap share, the routes, the rushing attempts, and all that stuff on the screen right now. With Jonathan Taylor, again, pretty typical usage is what I expected from these two Colts running backs. We saw Nyheim Hines get 8 targets, which is exactly where his role is going to come from. We saw Jonathan Taylor get a good number of carries. But the one thing that somebody asked me about in the comments or on Twitter, I can't remember where they asked me this, but they said, do I think 7 targets in a game, which is what Jonathan Taylor saw in this game, is sustainable? And to those people, I would say Nyheim Hines got 8 targets. So I think what this offense is going to look like, because they have nobody at wide receiver, right? Some people were excited about Pittman Jr. I wasn't one of those people. The they have nobody else to throw to narrative wasn't necessarily something I was buying into with Pittman. Zach Pascal, Paris Campbell, like all these guys, none of them actually inspire a lot of confidence in me to think that they're going to command a huge target share. So these running backs are going to be the driving force of this offense, both on the ground and in the receiving game. So the Colts have nobody at wide receiver. So yes, I think Jonathan Taylor can continue to be a feature ball carrier and also contribute in the passing game, because Dalvin Cook, for example, gets like 4 to 6 targets a game. I think Jonathan Taylor can have that kind of receiving workload. Of course, Nyheim Hines is going to out-target him, but I still think there's enough here because they don't have a lot of receiving talent to feature these running backs in the passing game. And we see them draw up designed plays for Jonathan Taylor, like screen passes and things of that nature. So I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. And Jonathan Taylor might have a bit higher of a receiving ceiling than a lot of people anticipated because of Nyheim Hines being there. And then on the Rams side of things, we can see that Darrell Henderson saw a huge share of the Rams running back touches, 94% of the snaps, 67% of the rushing attempts, 79% route participation. He was basically a feature workhorse in this game. And the one thing that I will say is that this literally breaks my heart knowing that Cam Akers might have had this role had he stayed healthy. But on Darrell Henderson's side of things, I will say I don't think this is going to quite stay as high as it is, because I think once Sony Michel, and there was some reports that came out about Sony Michel needing time to grasp the playbook and things of that nature. So once Sony Michel gets more acclimated to the system, more acclimated to the offense, I expect their roles to balance each other out a little bit more. I don't think Darrell Henderson is going to be 94% of the snaps every single game. I think we're going to be looking at a 65-35 type of split. And once that happens, I think Darrell Henderson's kind of ceiling goes down a little bit. But for this game, I still think he is going to get a pretty large share of the touches, large share of the routes and the carries and stuff like that. So he's a guy that I'm willing to start as a top 24 running back in this matchup. On to the Bills and Dolphins. Obviously, you're going to be starting Myles Gaskin. You could flex Devin Singletary, and I would stash Zach Moss, because I would remember about the Dolphins side. We'll start with them. Remember that this is a pseudo Patriots backfield. And my hunch is that Gaskin is playing that Dion Lewis role. Malcolm Brown is playing that LeGarrette Blount role. And Sullivan Ahmed is playing the role of like a James White, Rex Burkhead type. So Myles Gaskin, again, not a guy that I'm very excited about. He wasn't a guy that I was excited to draft in the offseason. He is the back to own here of all of the running backs in this backfield, but this is not the 67, 68% opportunity share back that we saw last year. They are mixing these guys in a little bit more. So I would remind you guys that if you have Myles Gaskin, to maybe go out and shop him, try and sell him while you still can, maybe package him and a wide receiver that had a good week last week, like Debo or Antonio Brown, and try and get up to a better running back. Try and get a Jonathan Taylor, an Antonio Gibson, a DeAndre Swift, a David Montgomery, because you might be able to do that if somebody is lacking depth and you play in a bit of a deeper league. So, or you could just take Myles Gaskin and try and trade him for Mike Evans, or try and trade him for Cooper Kupp or Robert Woods or one of these Rams wide receivers or something like that, where you can trade, a mediocre running back for a better wide receiver. I think that's also a pretty good move for that, but I would start him in this game. Obviously, he's going to get the primary share of the receiving game. He should get a decent amount of carries. So the Bills side of things is a whole other can of worms, because Devin Singletary was clearly the feature back in this game. As you guys can see, Zach Moss being a healthy scratch was super weird, in my opinion. I have no idea why that was the case. I still think he's the better back, Zach Moss over Devin Singletary. So I would go and pick up Zach Moss, because he probably got dropped today as of Wednesday when I'm recording this. He probably was dropped this morning in favor of some other running back. So I would go and pick up Zach Moss and just hold him on the back of your bench and just see what happens with his role, because maybe it was a disciplinary thing, right? Maybe he missed practice or something. That's why he was a healthy scratch. I don't think this is going to continue the rest of the season where Singletary is just some workhorse back. But in this game, you can flex Devin Singletary for sure, but I just don't think he's that good, quite frankly. So he's not a guy that I'm very excited about week in and week out, but he is a back-end RB2, high-end RB3 this week that you can flex if you need to. Patriots at Jets, another backfield mess for a couple of these teams, but you would start Damian Harris, flex James White, and I would sit every Jets running back. So on the Jets real quick, continue to stash Michael Carter if you can, if you have the space and the roster ability and flexibility to do that. But I'm not starting any one of these running backs. You can see the splits on the screen right now. Ty Johnson was the receiving guy and the long down and distance. Tevin Coleman was getting most of the carries. Michael Carter was mixed in here and there. Not overall a situation that I'm excited about. But when you look at the Patriots side of things, this is exactly what I expected. Damian Harris is the primary ball carrier. He will be efficient because he's a good runner of the football, and their offensive line is very good at run blocking and things of that nature. So Damian Harris is a guy that I think is going to be a back-end RB2 for the rest of the season for the most part. James White is a good flex piece and the clear running back passing game option for Mac Jones in this offense. I think he's going to have a pretty big role, 70, 80 target season at minimum. So he's a guy that I think you could throw into your flex if you need to each and every week. As you guys can see on the screen, obviously James White running the most routes, Damian Harris getting the most carries, exactly what we expected. So the Bengals at the Bears, again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this game. It's not really rocket science to tell you to start David Montgomery and to start Joe Mixon, but both of these guys are 3-down feature backs that are in your lineup week in and week out, basically. The one thing I will say about Joe Mixon is that he might be a ticking time bomb because I don't think he can handle 33 touches a game like he got in this game that we saw. So if he's going to continue to get this kind of volume, I do worry about his ability to hold up to it. I kind of wish they would use him a little less than what they're doing because they're not really even giving him a chance to breathe out there. So not everybody can handle a Christian McCaffrey workload, and I don't think Joe Mixon is one of those guys. So hopefully they dial back his workload just a little bit, just so he doesn't get hurt. But overall, like, great workload, obviously. Everything that we expected out of Joe Mixon this summer when we were talking up his workload. So to the 4 p.m. games, and I'll try and speed some of these up a little bit, but the Falcons and Buccaneers, again, a lot of murky backfields that I got to sort through here, but Mike Davis, Leonard Fournette are both flex plays for me, and you could probably deep flex Ronald Jones if you needed him. Mike Davis is going to be in for a tough game in this one. The Buccaneers defense is so stout against the run. You have to pass against this team, so I would pivot if you can. Currently, Mike Davis is my RB32 behind Leonard Fournette, who's my RB31, behind both Broncos running backs, Chase Edmonds, Devin Singletary, Josh Jacobs. So if you have any of those options, I would pivot away from Mike Davis in this matchup because even despite the great workload, which you guys can see on the screen, this is a terrible matchup for fantasy running backs. And we saw Ezekiel Elliott be virtually useless against the Bucs run game, and that's nothing new over the past couple of years. So the Bucs weekly headache, the fantasy Advil backfield, is officially upon us. We're going to have to figure out which Bucs running back we want to start each and every week if we have a Bucs running back. So for me, and this will probably be my stance all season, as you guys can see on the screen, we saw Leonard Fournette get the bulk of the work. And it's not that I think that is going to be the split every single game, because I don't think Ronald Jones is going to fumble every single game, but Leonard Fournette still maintained good involvement in the passing game, which was very important to me because I thought he might lose that role altogether to Gio Bernard. So I will choose him over any running back in this backfield because Bruce Arians really likes him. He has a lot of faith in him. Rojo makes one mistake and he stinks your lineup. He stinks up your lineup, drops like a 0. And Leonard Fournette clearly has a longer leash, even despite making a mistake of his own. So Leonard Fournette, to me, is clearly the best option in this backfield to be starting as a high-end RB3 kind of week in and week out. Rojo is still the better runner. I still think he's the better runner of the football, but give me Leonard Fournette as more receiving upside, a guy that should have split opportunity on the goal line, and he has also the ability to break any big play for a touchdown. So give me Leonard Fournette as the running back to own week in, week out in this backfield, in my opinion. So the Vikings at the Cardinals. In this game, you start Dalvin Cook, obviously, but Chase Edmonds and the Cardinals backfield is the more important, more kind of ambiguous situation that we need to go over. Pretty much exactly what I expected, though, is what happened in this backfield. Chase Edmonds was the feature back, 58% of the snap or so. Rushing attempts were split, though. Chase Edmonds actually was out carried by James Conner in this game. Edmonds, in my opinion, will be a back-end RB2, high-end RB3. James Conner startable in a pinch, but both guys limited by Kyler Murray's rushing to some degree. So not an overly great backfield from a fantasy perspective, but Chase Edmonds is still a guy that I'm willing to start as a back-end RB2, high-end RB3 type. I have him at RB24 on the week, just ahead of James Robinson, the Broncos running backs, and Elijah Mitchell. Titans and Seahawks, you start them both, right? Don't worry about Derrick Henry. I don't expect the Titans to get blown out every game like they did against the Cardinals. And Chris Carson, again, another guy that you should be starting each and every week. This is typical Chris Carson usage, as you guys can see on the screen. This was never a concern for me in the offseason. My concern with Chris Carson was, how long can he hold up? Because he's been a guy that's dealt with injuries. And how will he do against the tough schedule that he's about to face, right? They had a bit of an easier matchup in the first game, but it starts to get more difficult this game and then going forward. So Chris Carson is a mid RB2 as long as he's on the field, but expect, Alex Collins and DJ Dallas to fill whatever void Rashad Penny left behind. So the Cowboys and the Chargers, again, not going to spend too much time on this game because you should know to start both of these guys, Ezekiel Elliott and Austin Eckler. Don't worry about Austin Eckler's targets. I know he didn't get any targets in the game, but I think that'll correct itself. And Zeke Elliott won't be playing against the best run defense in the league every single week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, so he should be good to go. Great buy low candidate as well, because I think a lot of people are going to be concerned about him. This one could be a barn burner, right? This is probably going to be the highest scoring game on the week, so you want pieces in this game. Make sure you do not sit either of these running backs. Now we head over to Sunday Night Football. Chiefs at Ravens. Start CEH and flex Tyson Williams. Everybody and their mothers pretty much loved Clyde Edwards-Helaire and his elite upside for the Chiefs offense this draft season, but I'm not taking any victory laps right now, but I'm telling you, this is exactly what I expected. What we saw in week 1 is exactly what I expected. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is never going to be the engine of this offense. This offense runs through Patrick Mahomes and it runs through Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill. It does not run through Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He's never going to be a 20-plus carry running back. He's never going to be a 7-plus target running back. He's never going to be a running back that gets elite red zone involvement. What you see is what you get. He is the lead back on this team, but it's a smaller pie that we're working with than, let's say, the Saints backfield, for example, who utilizes their running backs in great ways. 70% of the rushing attempts in this game equated to 14 carries for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. They don't trust him in long down and distance, as you can see as well. They have 86% of the time, Darrell Williams was the long down and distance running back because Clyde Edwards-Helaire is not the type of running back that can pass protect efficiently and confidently. So this is a guy that is limited. If you drafted him, sell him for Swift and Montgomery. If you can add another piece to that deal, maybe Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Deebo Samuel, try and get yourself DeAndre Swift or get yourself David Montgomery, because I think all those guys are going to be more efficient. I think those guys are going to be better for fantasy than a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And then over to Tyson Williams. He's definitely a good start in this game, but he's another guy that I'd be shopping. All of these additions that they're making, Latavius Murray, Le'Veon Bell, all these other guys that they're bringing in, Devontae Freeman, they're eventually going to work into this backfield. And I think this backfield, again, back to the Chiefs' point, is a smaller pie that you're working with because Lamar Jackson is going to siphon away a good portion of the rushing offense of the Baltimore Ravens. So the fact that we're going to have a split backfield between a number of guys that are all, been in the league for a long time and should be efficient to some degree because they know what they're doing, I just don't really want a piece of this backfield in general. So if you have somebody willing to pay up big for Tyson Williams, again, if you can pair a Deebo Samuel, Antonio Brown with Tyson Williams and go up and get a better running back, a more reliable running back, then I would go and do something like that. So the last game that we're going to be talking about here is Monday Night Football, Lions at Packers. With these running backs, again, start them both. Aaron Jones and DeAndre Swift are 2 every week starts, in my opinion. I probably wouldn't trust Jamal Williams if you were thinking of starting him, but I suppose if you're in a pinch, he's not a terrible, deep flex play if you need him. Quickly on Aaron Jones, this is not a guy that I'm worried about one bit. He played 74% of the snaps through the first 3 quarters, and he handled 63% of the carries, 57% of the routes, and a 12% target share. So he was taken out of the game in the 4th quarter, which is why his overall stat line, his snap count, his targets, his carries and shit wasn't actually the most impressive in the world, but they were getting blown out. They kind of just took him off the field in the 4th quarter, which definitely makes sense. So DeAndre Swift, on the other hand, looks as advertised, I would say. And the impressive thing about what DeAndre Swift did is that might have been a game where his workload was managed coming off of a groin injury. So we might have not even seen the true ceiling of his workload. And this was a guy that commanded 11 targets, had 12 carries, and 68% of the snaps, 52% of the rushing attempts, 65% route participation, 20% target share. This was a guy that was involved. And another thing that's very encouraging to see is he was the 2-minute drill back and he was the long down and distance back because he, unlike Clyde Edwards-Helaire, is great in pass protection. So he's a guy that his coaches trust in that role, which is important because this team is going to be playing from behind a lot. They're not a very good team. They're not going to win a lot of games. So we want DeAndre Swift in this role. And it's very encouraging to see that Jamal Williams is not in this role. The only thing that we didn't see is Jamal Williams get the only inside the 5 carry in this game. But I think that's going to be kind of like a 50-50 split, maybe 60-40 on the goal line for those 2 running backs. And DeAndre Swift is far outproducing him in the receiving acumen of the game. So Williams will have a role. I'm not denying that, but Swift has top 5 potential this year with the target share that he might see, with the 100+ targets that he could see this year. He's a guy that can finish as a top 5 running back. So both of these guys in your lineup, DeAndre Swift should be in your lineup every single week. And I would be going to make offers for him if you don't own DeAndre Swift in fantasy this year, using Clyde Edwards-Helaire, using Myles Gaskins, Tyson Williams, whatever you can use to get DeAndre Swift on your team. I would suggest going out and doing that. If you guys enjoyed this video, again, I'm going to try and keep these as short as I possibly can, but there was a lot of information in week 1, obviously, that I had to address. Once I get through a lot of the information in the coming weeks, then I can make these videos shorter and shorter, more digestible for you guys. So like the video if you enjoyed, if you received some value, maybe I said something that you didn't know, gave you a piece of advice that you find actionable, leave a like on the video, comment any of your thoughts down below, start sit questions, trade questions, who should I pick up, whatever you guys want, we will answer your comment. We answer every comment on our YouTube channel, and that is 100% guaranteed. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. If this is the first time you're seeing a video of ours, go ahead and check out everything else that we're doing. Subscribe. If you want to support us, you can do it in multiple ways. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, you can go get our weekly rankings either for $20 or by signing up on Underdog Fantasy using promo code FSE. Check out the Patreon as well. We officially launched our Patreon page. You can go check that out at patreon.com/fantasy stock exchange. The link is in the description for that. ton of cool benefits for you guys to take advantage of. And if you guys want a fantasy football consultation with either myself, with Danny, or with both of us, you can check out our website, thefantasystockexchange.com, and you can book a fantasy football consultation to talk about whatever you want to talk about. Trades, waivers, dynasty, redraft, whatever you want to talk about, we will talk about it with you in a fantasy football consultation. So peace out, guys, and I'll talk to you next time.